special election edition of the Catholic Citizen, but we want to know if you can hear me or not. If you can't hear me, it's really no reason to watch the show other than I'm having a good hair day. Can you confirm in the chat if you can hear me? So Nick is asking if you can confirm in the chat if you can hear me. So let me know if you have just tuned into the Catholic Citizen. We're live today, post-election, to talk about the results, to talk about kind of what's going on in the country and just steps moving forward, folks. This is one election. It's not the end of the world one way or another, no matter what would have happened. Very important election. We'll certainly say that. But looking forward to talking about the issues today with you on the Catholic Citizen. And again, if you can let us know in the chat if you can hear me, that's kind of crucial to the rest of the show. So, Nick, how are we looking?
All right, we look good. Foundation for Life says that they can hear us.
All right, that's good. It's always good to be heard. Well, welcome to this week's Catholic Citizen, folks. Officially now, as we begin the show, as we talk about the election results from last night. You may have not stayed up into the wee hours of the night, but we have a new president-elect. President Donald Trump will again be the 47th president of the United States of America. So lots to cover on today's show. We won't keep it long for you, but just some interesting things that I want to talk about today on the Catholic Citizen. But first, let's go ahead and roll the tape as we get started and ready to go. All right, folks. Well, welcome back. It's great to have you here on the Catholic Citizen. What a night. What a tremendous night it was. Victories for life. Some defeats, unfortunately, that we'll go over as well. But, you know, when it comes to the presidency of the United States, I don't think a lot of prognosticators were looking at what we saw last night. And that's the first thing that I want to share, which is just really, really frustrating to me. And I think it's important to kind of remember. The media is about making money. And unless you're watching their shows, whether it be CNN or Fox, MSNBC, they're not making money if you're not watching their shows. So what they will do to keep you engaged is that they will take maybe a little kernel of truth and they'll spread that out so much so that it actually becomes a lie. So one example, we've had a tight race here for the presidency and it's been back and forth, but really, after the results last night, was it that close to begin with? So there was a story out of the newspaper in Iowa, Des Moines Register. A pollster there said that Vice President Harris had a 3-point lead going into the election. Now, this made national headlines over the weekend. Was this going to be a sign that Harris was going to run the tables in some ways, even in some red conservative states? Now, why did they do that? From a sinister perspective, you might say they're trying to influence and depress maybe the vote on one side or the other. Or could it just simply be they want to keep you tuned in? They want to keep you tuned in because if you're reading the fundamentals of the race from the very beginning, you would see the fundamentals of the race pointed towards people, over 70% of people being upset with the direction of the country, not trusting Vice President Harris with the economy versus President Trump. We know that people tend to vote their pocketbooks more than anything else. This election for many weeks was trending in a particular direction, but the media wanted to keep you tuned in. That's, again, how they make money at the end of the day. But a couple stories that I want to cover on this year's election before we get into kind of the Trump race. And actually, our friend Michael Tenney will be joining us here in a little bit. Just to, provide a different perspective, different thoughts on the election, and to share what he saw. Excuse me, he lives in the D.C. area, so it's a little bit different than him for him and his kind of friends group than it is up here in Northwest Ohio. But important news for me, first and foremost, was the abortion amendments that took place last night. So like we experienced here in Ohio last year, there were abortion amendments that would have legalized abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy in up to 10 states. Now, a couple of these states like New York already had pretty liberal abortion laws on the books where abortion was legal through all 9 months of pregnancy with no limits whatsoever. What they've done now in New York is just cemented that into their state constitution. However, there were other states around the country that had amendments: Arizona, Colorado, Maryland, Montana, Nevada, where they all approved abortion amendments. Unfortunately, I believe in Nevada they have to vote on it again next year, but this first vote is a sign of which direction they're heading. But the big news here for the pro-life movement is we had some states that won, that defeated these ballot initiatives for the first time. And, I've been saying for a long time, as the dust would settle from Roe v. Wade having been overturned, and people would see, hey, look, the sky isn't falling, and that the women that are dying because they're actually taking the abortion pills, as we saw from Amber Thurman in Georgia. That the left tried to twist to say that was because of pro-life laws, why she died. But you look at Florida, First Amendment came out that they had defeated that amendment. They also defeated recreational marijuana. And why did they do that? Well, I think there's two really important reasons. One, they had a 60% threshold to change your constitution. That's huge, can't be overlooked. But Governor Ron DeSantis really leaned in very hard on these issues and fought against them. And he used the bully pulpit to convince people to not vote for these things. That's huge. That's what exactly we need our leaders to do. Nebraska and South Dakota also defeated their abortion amendments. So glory to God. I mean, this is thousands of lives that will be saved because those abortion amendments have been defeated here in the States. So that's the first big news story that you're not going to get a lot of media coverage over outside of The View covering that today, talking about Ron DeSantis being such a problem down there in Florida. Well, he is a problem. He's a good problem to have for those who believe in conservative principles. Now, taking away from last night, the election, is Trump expanding the base in a really amazing way. And, going back to the GOP kind of convention, it was very clear that he was trying to expand the base, expand his kind of core support, if you will. And he certainly did that last night in really some kind of historic ways. So when you look at, let's break this down by race first and foremost. Whites, 55% of whites voted for President Trump. This is exit polling from CNN, so I'm sure some of these numbers will be updated and get closer to the reality, but this is what we originally saw from last night. The African-American vote went overwhelmingly again for Harris. However, there were some states, some outliers where in Wisconsin, for example, President Trump really taking what was his last time in the single digits, moving that support among African Americans up into the 20% tile, which was just absolutely huge for him in Wisconsin. But overall, the nation still only about 12% African American support. The big news of the night, though, was the Latino population. So 45% of Latinos, this has not happened since 2004. As a Republican got this much support from Latino population, 45% supporting President Trump, 53% against. That is unheard of numbers when it comes to Republican presidential politics. Now, the second thing that was interesting to me was, again, one of the media narratives that we got coming into this election. We even had video commercials made by the Harris campaign to say that, don't listen to your husband necessarily. You can vote, how you really want to or whatever. And so the narrative walking into this was Harris was just going to blow away Trump with all this feminine support because the only issue that women care about are quote unquote reproductive rights. The only issue they care about is the ability to kill their preborn children. Well, that's just simply not true. The gender breakdown last night, 54% males went for Trump, 44% for Harris. Females, 54% for Harris, but 44% for Trump. That's not anything unexpected or outside kind of normal kind of election numbers when it comes to when we're looking at presidential politics. So again, just one of those narratives that was pushed by the media, and whether they were pushing it to help it come true or whether they were pushing just because they wanted stories to cover, who knows? But it's one of those narratives that didn't come true. When you look at, this is another kind of really big number here for us, the exit polling from CNN, 62% of Protestant or other Christians went for Trump versus 37% for Harris. But look at these Catholic numbers. 56% of Catholics voting for President Trump versus 41% of Harris. And when you look at Harris and her background, she was really one of the most anti-Catholic politicians to run for the highest office that we've ever seen in the land. I mean, she questioned Knights of Columbus members whether or not they were fit to be on the federal judiciary simply because they are members of the Knights of Columbus. So not a big surprise that she got a lot of Catholic support, but the Trump administration really focused in on trying to court Catholics. And I think hopefully we played our small part here at Awaken Catholic just to inform Catholics about Catholic Church teaching and how the Catholic Church teaching does not line up in particular with a Democratic Party platform. It doesn't fit neatly or perfectly in the Republican Party platform, but it certainly does not line up with Democratic Party priorities. One last interesting thing about religion, if you had no affiliation, no religious affiliation whatsoever, you went 72% for Harris versus 25% for Trump. There really is a worldview war going on in our country concerning this view of the way that the world is structured, and it revolves around religion and revolves around another key category I want to cover here, and that is marital status. Married people went for President Trump 55% to 44%. Not married people went for Harris 56% versus 41%. There is a growing demographic of young women that have more kind of liberal values that are a part of the Democratic base. But look, when we get married and when we start having children, our paradigm shift of what we think kind of is important, it changes, it switches. And it naturally kind of makes you more conservative because you have a family to care for. Maybe we'll explore that a little bit more in another show. Two more things that I want to cover before we invite in Mike Tenney from our team here at Awaken Catholic, just to share his reflections and thoughts on the election. But one was particular Ohio issues. So number one, the Supreme Court candidates that were pro-life going into the election all won. That's huge for us here in the state of Ohio as they hear kind of the cases that revolve around abortion in the years to come in our state. So please God, they'll hear these cases and they will render decisions that are true and just based upon what is good, true, and beautiful. So that means the Ohio Supreme Court, there's a 6-1 kind of pro-life majority on the court. All really, really good things. Second big thing coming out of Ohio, issue 1 was defeated. All the numbers we saw kind of going into issue 1 was that issue 1 probably was going to be passed. And that's because they had $40 million for issue 1 coming in from out of state to support this issue. The no side had about $8 million. But that's where I really think, like, again, shows like this here at Awaken Catholic, the Catholic Citizen, organizations like the Center for Christian Virtue through their Church Ambassador Network, getting the word out there about not allowing the permanent gerrymandering that would have taken place with the passing of issue 1 here in Ohio. The third big story out of Ohio, though, Bernie Moreno winning and defeating Sherrod Brown, who's been in office before I was alive. I think it's close to that. It's been over 30 years, I think. So Sherrod Brown winning this race. And this is why this is such an important race, though. Sherrod Brown spent millions of dollars. If you had your TV on here at Ohio at all, Sherrod Brown spent millions of dollars critiquing Bernie Moreno's pro-life position. And he had quotes of Bernie Moreno up there. He had videotape of Bernie Moreno talking about being pro-life. Sherrod Brown really tried to hammer in on this issue that Bernie Moreno was pro-life. He was pro-choice. He was going to protect women's rights. And who won? Bernie Moreno. So what this tells us is two things. One, abortion was on the ballot last year, and yes, it did pass issue 1, but that was 4 million people of Ohio's electorate. There's 8 million registered voters in the state of Ohio. It'd be interesting to see what would have happened here in 2024. But number 2, it means you can be a politician, you can be pro-life, and you can win elections. Bernie didn't run away from his pro-life convictions. Actually, when the Trump administration said that they weren't going to embrace any limit or any weeks limit, Bernie said, well, I said I was for a 15 limit federally, and he stuck by it. He didn't change his position on that, and he still won. So again, I think it's a test case to say pro-life politicians can hold the pro-life position, they can win elections, and it's more than just what the other side wants to make this to be, that it's simply a left versus right thing on the issue of abortion.
Pete, I want to jump in on that topic because I got a really interesting message from someone yesterday connected to what we were publishing with that voting guide video, the Catholic vote video, which, we're a small channel. We're a young channel. Even though it's been around for a few years, a huge amount of that time was a hiatus. But being such a young channel, that video blew up. And that's such a testament to all of the good people, boots on the ground, helping to share the video and all that kind of stuff. But in response to posting that video, I got a message from somebody who I know is a really well-meaning and authentic Catholic person that kind of surprised me because I know that she's a lovely woman. And I'm not going to share who it was or anything, but she sent me this video, she sent me in response to the video a message that said, what about threats on Liz Cheney by Trump? What about all the violent remarks he makes? How do you vote for such a person? And obviously, there's that sentiment. There's the concern about some of his personality flaws. And then you were just talking about the issue of abortion. There are so many, even Catholics, who from the standpoint of, I think, a malformed but legitimately authentic notion of compassion for women, have this misplaced concern about keeping abortion legal. And we even know, though, from Trump's campaign that he has never said he was going to make it federally, nationally against the law. But there is this rhetoric and this narrative on the left that is still trying to propagate the idea that he's going to do that, even though he is committed to never do that. But we wish he would, as Catholics. But I just want to kind of bring voice to and bring into this conversation. And I think this is going to be a good segue for Mike Tenney to join us. This notion that there are really, really good people that are really heartbroken right now because they were just misinformed about who President Donald Trump is. They're misinformed about what the teachings of the Catholic Church are. Or even if they do know the teachings, they still are seeing it as, in the hierarchy, lesser than compassion. That compassion for the women somehow supersedes the teachings of the Catholic Church. And so I just want to kind of have us acknowledge here on the show, and we'll bring Mike Tenney in here for this part of the conversation as well, this notion of compassion and like there are legitimately good people that are heartbroken right now, and I want us to kind of address them as a team. And Mike Tenney, we're going to bring you in here in just a second, but I want to encourage anyone watching, please join us in the comment section. Let us know your thoughts about our discussion, your reactions to the election results. And also make sure to share this live stream, subscribe to the channel. All right, Mike Tenney, let's bring you in here. And as we bring Mike in, Peter, if you want to kind of touch on what I was just saying.
Yeah, well, thanks. I have to put on the headphones to hear Mike. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
You'll hear him out of one of your ears.
Well, one is better than nothing.
Yes.
Hey, Mike, you there?
I'm here. Hi, Peter. It's good to see you.
Hey, well, it's good. Well, I can't see you, so I can hear you, which is...
Well, you look great, man.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Well, yeah, first and foremost, Nick, let me just say this. JD Vance actually hit on this a little bit at a campaign event, that he has friends that are not of the same political persuasion, and that he hopes that, he doesn't lose those friendships over an election. And unfortunately, we've lost the art of being able to just have conversations together as family members, as friends, to be able to disagree at times, but not necessarily to lose friendships. And if we're not able to have crucial conversations without having disagreements. And, I think the three of us, even here on the show today, if we get down deep into politics, we're going to have disagreements and everything of that nature as well. But it doesn't mean we necessarily need to kind of, not be friends anymore. So that's first and foremost. The Liz Cheney thing, I'd have to look more into Trump's comments as I understand them. And maybe Mike actually read a little bit more about this. But as I understand it, I think Trump was making a point that, when we get involved in a foreign war, which, again, St. John Paul II reminds us that war is a defeat for humanity. And we do live in a country that has a military industrial complex, which makes a lot of money off of foreign wars. And the more wars that we're engaged in, the more money some of these kind of military companies make. But Trump made the point that, Liz Cheney or any politician who votes for a foreign war should have to go fight them. And I think that's a valid point sometimes when you're trying to make the point that if politicians who voted for wars actually had to fight in them themselves, or they had to send their sons or daughters, maybe they would be a little less apt to be so gung-ho towards actually jumping in and fighting a war. So the way that I first saw it in the media was that Trump called for Liz Cheney to be killed by a firing squad or something of that nature. So, I think that's, again, where the media plays a responsibility in kind of reporting accurately what is said and then putting things kind of in context as well. Now, again, one other thing is, we're not shy here when it comes to believing that words matter. And President Trump and the way that he's spoken, for example, about immigrants and the immigration issue, not helpful to upholding kind of human dignity. And so that's upon all pro-lifers, all people who believe in the dignity of life from the moment of conception, natural death, to challenge him and challenge his supporters to do just that, because we're part of the solution when it comes to building a culture of life and love in the country as well. But look, no matter your positions on immigration or your positions on the rhetoric of one candidate or another, all of which matters, and we've seen that very concretely, even with, assassination attempts on President Trump's life. I mean, constantly referring to him and supporters of his as kind of like Hitler or Nazis and things of that nature. I mean, the comparison, for example, of he held a rally at Madison Square Garden, and then suddenly it was kind of like it was on all these news networks that it was like he was being Hitler and the Nazis just because he held a rally there. And then many years before, the Nazis had held a rally there. I mean, that's completely dangerous rhetoric, right? So at the end of the day, words do matter. And we all need to be better as far as the way that we love and treat one another, in the days to come. And I don't know how it's, are these things going to switch overnight? You can only hope that President Trump, being 78, maybe will tone it down a little bit. I don't know. We'll see. But Mike, your thoughts?
Oh man, so much of what you guys have been talking about. And first of all, Peter, I just want to say thank you for the past, I guess, 2 election cycles you've been doing this Catholic Citizen show. And you and I don't always agree and don't always see eye to eye, but I feel like we have great respect for each other, and we've had a lot of deep conversations. And I feel like I've learned a lot from you and your perspective. And there's definitely some things that we agree like rock solid on, and we understand each other's heart. And there's other kind of ways we kind of push back on each other a little bit. And I feel like that has been very beneficial for me, either watching the show or in direct conversations with you. So I just want to say thank you for your faithfulness, and especially for your unstilting defense of the unborn, especially in Ohio, because that's something that, I mean, yeah, I think you're doing some real heroic stuff in that fight. So thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
But yeah, to say that, so I live in Maryland, which I think is the most liberal state other than like Vermont. I was looking at the distribution of votes from like blue states to red states, and what was the most blue and what was like hyper blue. And it was like DC, Vermont, Maryland, California. Like Maryland, where I live, is even more blue than California, like that. And so people here are freaking out. Like around here, you wouldn't like, I've had friends be like that they were at lunch with coworkers, and somebody said, "Oh, you're not going to like who I'm voting for," and then that person is like castigated from their office. Like they're like if you don't mention that you're a Trump supporter or a Republican around here in a lot of places, it's like that unpopular.
Hmm.
And I myself I've never voted for Trump. I'm a conservative I've grown up being a conservative, and I've traditionally voted for, I voted for McCain, I voted for Romney, but I've never been able to pull the trigger for Trump. And I was closer this time than ever have been before, largely because of something you said, which is, trust the record over the rhetoric, and him getting the justices in to overturn Roe v. Wade was huge. I think the Abraham Accords were huge. I think, the fact that a lot of the scary things some people thought he was going to do, because he says crazy hyperbolic things sometimes. He never did. He never put Hillary in jail. And the fact that he kept us out of wars and was generally good on foreign policy, at least better than Biden was. A lot of that stuff was like maybe I could pull the trigger for him this time. But I ended up voting again for the American Solidarity Party, because again, in Maryland, my vote is kind of a protest vote anyway, voting for Trump. So I said, he's kind of softened on his pro-life stance, and so has JD Vance, which really upsets me. And I know that's something you and I have talked about before. So I really wanted to stick to my pro-life ideal, since I was whether I voted for Trump or whether I voted for American Solidarity Party, I was going to be taking kind of a principled stand anyway. I decided I was going to stick with my conscience and not compromise at all. But around here, man, yeah, people are scared. People are hurting. It was in a group text this morning with some friends, and one friend said, yeah, I'm super sad and I'm anxious about what's going to happen now. Another one was like, oh yeah, same brother, same. Especially several of my queer friends are like, I feel like they're going to come for me. I feel like, I don't know if I'm going to survive the next 4 years, which, I think some of that is hyperbolic, but I also want to acknowledge that some people have some real fear because they don't feel seen or understood by Donald Trump, by JD Vance, by Republicans. And they're kind of looking at the results of this and being like, who are these people that I'm living in this country with? You're telling me the majority of the country is okay with this guy who was found liable of sexual assault, who tried to overthrow the last election. And they look at all these things and they say, how can these not be disqualifying? How can XYZ, these things that he's done, the rhetoric he uses, how can that not just say he's off the board? You're saying by voting for him, you're saying you're okay with sexual assault, you're okay with racism, you're okay with overturning our democracy. I find some of that, and I mean, part of those things are part of the reason why I never voted for him as well. But anyway, that's the mood in Maryland right now. It's very doom and gloom. Everybody's depressed except a few people. So.
I wonder if I could drill down on and maybe some of the fears, because I think
Please.
Following some of my former students on Facebook that I worked with in the inner city of Cleveland and stuff like that, a lot of them feel as if Donald Trump is severely racist, and is going to hurt the Black community. Do you think he's racist? Do you think that's a media portrayal of him? Where do you think this, and even some of the other fears you mentioned, where do those fears, where do they come from more than anything? Because again, I mean, I just look at his 4 years in office, his attempt with Senator Tim Scott to kind of produce these opportunity zones in the inner city, and trying to increase, economic opportunities for African Americans. I don't see it the way that other people see it, I guess. But where do you think
the
those things come
accusations
from?
of racism come from? One, I think the left loves to accuse Republicans of being racist, and so I think anyone who's a Republican is automatically accused of being racist. So I think that's, I don't know, not the greatest reason. What is a little more valid is, I'll kind of go in order of things I think are less valid to more valid, is, you look at Republican tickets and you look at the Republican senators and House of Representatives, far fewer of them are people of color. Far fewer of them are women than on the Democrat side. So I think a lot of times they see Republican events and it just looks like a bunch of white guys, with a few exceptions. There's Ben Carson, there's JD Vance's wife, there's Tim Scott, as you said. There's Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice. There's a few there, but far less than on the Democrat side. So I think some people just see that and they say, oh yeah, it's all these white guys. Something that a friend of mine who's an author pointed out to me is that back in, I think it was the 90s, Donald Trump was very much involved in this effort to get, there were these five guys, I forget, it was like the Manhattan Five or the Brooklyn Five or something like that, but it was in New York, and there were these five black young men who had been accused of something, of hurting someone, or I don't know the details, but anyway, Donald Trump, and there wasn't a whole lot of evidence against them, but Donald Trump like put out ads and put up billboards saying like, these guys need to go to jail. So some people have used that as a sign that he's racist. Back when Obama was running for office, Donald Trump was very much part of the birth certificate, the birther thing, where there was like, let's show us the birth certificate because he's really from Kenya. So I think some of that is where he's gotten a little bit of a lot of a reputation of being racist. And then, you know, he's got very uncouth language and, you know, says, you know, they're sending the rapists across the border. And then people say, oh, he thinks all Mexicans are rapists, that sort of thing. So I think there are certainly some things he said, certainly some things that he's done. So I don't think that's totally an invalid argument, but I think if you look at his policies while he was president, I don't think that's, I don't know. I don't think like he's not setting up, he's certainly not like explicitly outwardly racist in the way of like Jim Crow laws, those sorts of things. But I think there are some things that make people of color, you know, suspicious. So
if I could jump in for 2 seconds, I've heard so many of these arguments, and each one of them I have found an opportunity to discover something that totally invalidates them. And for me, racism has such a heavy implication, and it's such a heavy thing to like attack someone with. The implications are profound, and to say that he's racist, like we all have certain biases or prejudices or whatever that we carry that are a combination of our upbringing, a combination of the environments that we're in or whatever. But to say that someone is racist when I heard him do an interview, and I don't remember which show it was, but the interviewer brought up a story from Trump's past that he had discovered where, I don't remember if it was like Nelson Mandela or it was some African person that was trying to do some work in the United States to propagate the work, you know, their mission or whatever. And they couldn't get the United States to provide some kind of accommodation for them, whether it had to do with their flights or security or whatever. And this is again a black politician or something, and Trump stepped in the absence of our country helping them. Trump stepped in and funded everything that they needed to do what they needed to do in the United States. And the interviewer was like, why aren't you telling that story? That would demolish the entire argument about your racism, because this is decades ago. And Trump was basically like, I don't know, I do things for the right reasons, not to talk about it. Like that, he gave some kind of answer in that vein. And the guy interviewing him was so blown back by this story and he almost was like brought to tears talking about it. And I just think that, you know, we can't look at things in isolation. We have to take in the full big picture. There are things that I got accused of. For example, in high school, there was something that happened, and I got accused of exploiting the death of a dear childhood friend of mine by writing music for him. And the people, like, this is a rumor that was going around my high school. It was something that was absolutely destroying my name amongst my peers, and it was so untrue. It couldn't have been further from the truth. But that's the perception that people started to have in the culture of my high school. And that was devastating for me when I discovered that. I didn't even know about that for months. And then I heard that everyone in high school thought that about me. And I was like, what the, like, that is not who I am. And I just think we have to be so careful about misidentifying people with these heavy labels that carry tremendous consequence. And I just kind of feel for Trump when it comes to this racism topic, because I've kind of been there. And I know that historically there are things that would totally disprove that notion. So I just wanted to jump in and share that.
Well, I think one thing that, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's helpful not to think of things in terms of a binary. Is he racist? Isn't he racist? Is he good? Is he bad? We're all a mix of good and bad. And might Trump have, you know, done something in the 80s or 90s with, again, I'm blanking on the name of it, but it was these like 5 young African-American boys. Like, might he have unjustly persecuted them? Might he been a little off his rocker with the Obama birther thing? Might he also have been very generous and kind in the situation that Nick is mentioning? Yeah, all of those things can be true. And so I think we have to look at the totality of, and one of the things that I think was really interesting that you were mentioning, Peter, is Trump did better with African-American voters and way better with Latino voters, even though I think the accusations of racism have been way more along the lines of Latinos than it has been against African-Americans. He got like 45% of the Latino vote, which no Republican since George W. Bush, who spoke Spanish, has gotten. And so I think not only are, 3 white guys, well, Nick, you're half Cuban, so I know, so you're not really quite in that boat.
Excuse me, half
yeah,
Cuban?
Sorry. You're full Cuban?
Yes.
All right. Well, I know you're not full white. Okay. Mea culpa. Anyway, what was I saying? Anyway, so like some people might look at us and say, oh, it's easy for 2 Latinos and a white guy, or 1 Latino and 2 white guys. So look at this in one way, but many Latino voters and many Black voters looked at Donald Trump this time and were convinced by him. And so I think the accusations of racism, at least in a systemic way that's dangerous for people, not only has that been unconvincing for the 3 of us, that's been unconvincing for a lot of people of color. That's been unconvincing for a great many Latinos, 45% of Latinos, that's been unconvincing for. So I think that's a kind of
going back to your original point, Tenny, and I think it's an important one, and we've gone down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I think it's an important one because there is real general fear of some people, and I think, well, why is that? And I think I would go back to your first point. And I would go back to a show that I detest. I tell my kids, we don't say hate, we say detest. Actually, it came from my wife, but anyway, so I detest The View, and on The View, when President Trump was originally running in 2016, President Trump was welcomed with open arms. There was kisses giving. There was, Joy Behar and Whoopi Goldberg just, hey, tell us why you're running, what's going on, everything of that nature. And now he's the spawn of Satan, basically, to those individuals. And it's because I believe he's adopted some kind of more conservative kind of policies. And like you said, I mean, whether it's Mitt Romney, McCain, whoever it is who runs from the right, that person's going to be racist. And the way that the Trump speaks and some of these isolated instances that you can pull out of his past, say, yep, look, that's evidence that he's racist. I mean, you think about the millions and billions of dollars that are spent on campaigns and through the media. It is so easy, and especially having been through kind of a national media campaign myself now here in the state of Ohio with our abortion amendment last year, to see the way that the media is so easily able to twist things to produce their particular side of things that they want you to see. That's scary. And I think President Trump is a victim of that kind of witch hunt that's come after him in a lot of different categories, not only just the racism category, but somehow, some way, that was broken through this election cycle, as you mentioned, with the Latino vote. So, but Tenny, just curious, your overall just general impressions of last night. What jumped out at you? I listed some of the numbers that was kind of surprising to me, but curious why you think most of the country did. I mean, even in a very blue state like New York, she won convincingly there, I think 10, 12 points, but not to the level that Joe Biden won 4 years ago. So what was it about the Harris campaign or Harris as a candidate that was not convincing to fire up kind of the normal Democratic base to get out there? Or what are your just general thoughts that you saw from the election that stuck out to you?
So I think there's 2 reasons why Kamala underperformed. And one is, I think she doesn't do well on her feet. Like she can study real well. Like she did real well in that one debate versus Trump, where she did better than him and she kind of flustered him. And it was like an hour, maybe 45 minutes. But you look at her speeches, a lot of them are repetitive. She's famous for like the word salad, whereas Trump, and especially JD Vance, is super well spoken. Like, Trump kind of wanders all over the place, but then he comes back to his point. And he's very charismatic and he's very funny. And JD Vance, I feel like, can go up against anybody and talk circles around him in a really respectful way. And I think we saw that on his Joe Rogan interview and also with Tim Walz. And so I think people saw that, and then they see Kamala, and she can't really present herself. She can't convince people. So she's not good at the rhetoric. And when you think of, this is the person that's going to be standing up to Putin, this is going to be the person standing up to Xi Jinping, this is the person standing up to, Iran and North Korea. Like who's the person you want to be on that at that bargaining table on your side? And I would much rather have JD Vance and Donald Trump on my side, standing across from Putin, standing up to him, than Kamala Harris, who just doesn't seem to be able to handle that sort of pressure. So that's one thing. I think people just, they saw that she wasn't great on her feet, and they weren't wowed by like a Bill Clinton or a Barack Obama sort of presence, where those, Barack Obama, hate him or love him, I mean, even if you disagree with him, you kind of gotta love, he's just so likable. He's so gosh darn likable. He's very charismatic. And
he's got that charm.
He has that charm. And Kamala Harris just doesn't have that. The second reason is I think we have hit peak woke. So Nick knows this, but I started homeschooling my kids 2 years ago. This is the second year. I'm a stay-at-home dad most of the time when I'm not doing speaking and worship leading. And I tell people now that I homeschool my kids, and the overwhelming reaction is not, oh my gosh, that's so weird, they're not going to be socialized. You homeschool your kids? Wow, you must be some sort of Christian weirdo. No, the overwhelming response is, oh my gosh, I wish I could do that. So that's so good that you're doing. That's amazing that you're doing that. The stuff they're teaching in schools is crazy. Like that is overwhelmingly, even from my liberal friends, that is what I'm getting. And I think so much of the Democratic Party has just jumped the shark. They've gone so far in terms of the gender ideology and especially, but there's so many things, the accusations of racism, I think, and defund the police, I think, have just gone so far overboard. Even if they have maybe some valid points in the beginning, I think people have just kind of seen that excess. And I think what you were saying, Peter, about married couples, like if you were married, basically you voted for Trump, it seems like. That was I think that's a huge takeaway, is the Democrats have really lost sight in a lot of ways of these kind of culture war issues, and they don't realize how extreme they are, because Trump and JD Vance, much to my chagrin, are very centrist on abortion. They're very centrist on LGBTQ issues. They came to the center and they moderated on those things. And I think the left just doesn't realize its own excesses. It doesn't realize how crazy and out of step they've gotten. So I think those two things. One, Kamala is not that, she doesn't give you a lot of confidence that she's going to stand up for you. And two, I think we've passed peak woke. We've realized we've been going through a witch hunt. We've been doing the McCarthyism thing of the 1950s. And I think there's a recorrection happening. So
yeah, two points that I think a lot of that's very well stated. I think the one issue with the wokeness stuff, and I think it really hurt Democrats, because I think the reproductive rights did draw out a lot of people to vote for Kamala. However, I think that was kind of capped to a certain extent among suburban women. I'll have to dig deeper into the numbers and some of the exit polls, but because some of the trans ideology stuff that the Democratic Party has just fully embraced, including Kamala coming out and saying, yeah, whether it's people in prisons that should be able to have taxpayer-funded surgeries, or even access for youth and gender to these medicine and surgeries as well. I think a lot of suburban moms are like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, we want to be loving and accepting of everybody, but I think we're going a little bit too far with that stuff. Yeah. And then two, to your point about her not being great on her feet, I think one of the things that I put down as far as, if I had to pull out two events that kind of defined this campaign, I'll get to Trump's in a moment, but for Kamala, it was on The View when she was asked if there was anything she would change from the Biden administration. And she said, well, no, I don't think there's anything that I would change. And that kind of spoke to her not being good on her feet to read the tea leaves of kind of where the culture was in general. People hurting economically and not necessarily feeling comfortable with the way that the economy was going. Although we've seen some inflation coming down a little bit, but
yeah,
then
the stock market's doing great right now.
Right. But then two, her 70% of the people leading up to the election felt like the country wasn't going in the right direction. Yeah. Now, it's a very nebulous term. What do you mean the country is not going in the right direction? There's a million different things that people could be thinking when they answer that question. But as a candidate for the president of the United States, you have to pick up on the feeling of the country. And I don't think she necessarily really did that. And that pointed to a certain extent, a lack of authenticity, I think, and from her very early careers as AG in California to running for president herself and kind of taking some different positions on issues in elections, including this one, than she had. I mean, you can look at fracking, for example.
Yeah, like Vance was great at explaining like why I didn't support Trump before and now I do. He was very
Right.
articulate about that, whereas Kamala never really was able to explain like this is why my position has changed.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think Vance is someone who is someone you may not like where he stands on a lot of different things, but he has a principled way of explaining where he stands. And when Kamala got before Anderson Cooper, and she was just saying, "Well, I need to think about things, or I pull smart people together." Not necessarily a bad strategy, but when you're being asked to lead the country, people want a little bit more depth when it comes to your answers and your thoughts on things.
Something that I thought was interesting that I saw, it was like an exit poll. They were taking polls of people coming out of the polls and or out of the voting, and they asked them, "Do you fear for democracy in America?" And like 70% of the people said yes, and a lot of people thought, "Aha, that means they're going to vote for Kamala." But actually, more of those people voted for Trump. And again, I think this gets back to what I was saying before. Like, I think the left doesn't realize its own excesses. It doesn't realize how far off the reservation they often are. Is that they're saying, Trump's a threat to democracy. And I'm worried about that. To be honest, the way he did not leave, office in 2020 and like that's worrisome to me. Like, that's another reason why I once again, I couldn't vote for him. But I don't think the Democrats realize that they're also threatening to do things that are anti-democratic as well, with the censorship and in big tech, like the Twitter files that exposed how much Democrats were involved in censoring on Facebook and that sort of thing, and like the Russian collusion thing, and also like Kamala saying she wants to overturn the filibuster, although I bet she doesn't want to now that they're going to lose the Senate, or saying that she's going to stack the Supreme Court. Like, these are not just conservative problems. Like, we need a civics lesson, not just for the Republicans, but for the whole country. Like, there's plenty. If you're a Democrat, if you're on the left and you're looking at the Republicans saying they're a threat to democracy, they're undermining our institutions, they're calling into question the claims that, the value of and integrity of our institutions and our election process, like, that's going on the other side too. Like, it's so important right now, I think, as American citizens, and especially as Catholics who don't have a loyalty to conservative or liberal. Like, we follow the king and we follow the truth. Like, it's just so important for us to get out of our silos, to get out of our echo chambers, to listen to both sides, to use our well-formed consciences and our reason and our intellect to discuss with charity, and to think about these things and not just be like, oh, well, the left says it, the right says it, it's us and them, and we're the good guys and they're the bad guys, and that's who I'm going to follow. We need to be more informed citizens.
Yeah, I just want to push back on one thing that you said as far as Trump not leaving office. On January 20th, he did leave.
Oh, yeah,
January 6th is its own beast, right? And we could do a couple shows on what happened that day and things of that nature. But when it came down to it, when it was his time to leave the Oval Office, he left the Oval Office. Like, he didn't put troops around the White House or anything of that nature. So,
if I could just jump in for a minute, we have a couple of chats. So the first one we got, I can't put on screen, but it was, "We are at war with the media and the Democratic Party, but not our fellow Americans who have been brainwashed." That is, I think, a very fair and sober summation of the situation, which is directly connected, I think, to the next chat, which is on YouTube from Kevin J. Kevin J says, "Nobody has ever suggested taxpayer-funded gender affirmative care for prisoners." And then he said, "That's a mega niche case that was made up to rile people up." Your thoughts, gentlemen, about both of those chats?
I mean, the only thing I know about taxpayer-funded gender affirmative care for prisoners was just like a clip that I saw that Kamala had said on a podcast. So I don't know the depths of it. I think, I don't know the merits of that particular thing, whether she was talking about in general or just in that one case. But I think it was emblematic and representative for people of a larger ideology of your internal feelings can determine your your sex. Like your gender really comes down to how you feel on the inside, and your gender identity is more important than your biological sex. And not only is that something that you're free to live out as an individual, but that's something we are going to support by letting you be on, opposite sex teams and use opposite sex bathrooms and locker rooms, and pay for medical care. And also there's been lots of evidence of, research that shows that, gender treatments and the hormones and the puberty blockers and all those things are not really that good, but a lot of that's been hushed up. A lot of that has, like, the WPATH files, if you've ever looked into that, there's a whole medical scandal waiting to be discovered there about all this, gender care. So I think even if that specific comment about prisoners receiving, quote unquote gender affirming care on the taxpayer dime, even if that wasn't like a broader policy, I think it was emblematic for people of the general approach to gender, and it was emblematic of gender ideology and how much the Democrats and the left had jumped the shark on that issue.
I agree.
Yeah, I would just say, the track record of the Biden-Harris administration was to support transgender surgery, including for our kind of military personnel. When it comes to that particular case of the interview that she did, she stated in that interview that she supports funding for transgender individuals in prison to get a surgery. So happy to circle back around the show and provide documentation for her position. Whether or not that became official Biden-Harris administration position, I don't know.
And just to for those who might be listening that are transgender or love a transgender person, like in my life, just this past year, I had some friends of ours, their daughter transitioned to become a man with the surgery and the hormones and everything at some time in high school, college. And just within this past year, after living as a man for several years, took her own life, to his, however you want to say it, took their own life. And, a lot of people are saying, oh, it's because they weren't accepted. But like, I'm not so sure. And I think there's starting to be some contrary data turning out that it can actually make things worse. It can actually lead to suicidality. So, my opposition to the gender affirming care, quote unquote, is out of concern for people who are struggling with their gender identity. It's not a condemnation or a hate. It's out of concern for them that, we don't have good science on this yet. And a lot of the science is being covered up for ideological reasons.
What do you think is behind that? What, like you said, I'm not so sure. And then you started to say that you think it could be, in fact, the opposite. What do you think is behind that?
Behind people
that
covering up the
this
science?
happened because, well, yes, that, but also you said that she wasn't, like, people proposed that she self-deleted because she wasn't affirmed. And you said, I'm not so sure.
I'm not so sure, just because, and I don't want to give away too many details, but just from knowing the family was very affirming. It wasn't these cases of, oh, you're trans, get out of my house. Like this child was very much affirmed in their new gender identity, and seemed accepted. And at their college, it wasn't one of these cases where they were bullied all the time and that sort of thing. So, yeah. So, and I think, and then stuff coming out of the WPATH files. And even I think the New York Times had an op-ed just like last week that there was this big study that came out about gender affirming care leading to negative outcomes down the road. And they weren't allowed to publish it because it didn't come out with the popular view. Like, so the science is being withheld if it doesn't support the prevailing narrative.
Right. Well, let me say a couple of things. One, we love everybody. And if you haven't been touched by a family member or friend who's either struggling with their sexual attraction or struggling with transgender issues, then you probably will at some point, because based on the way the culture is going. So we love everybody no matter what. But two, we have a particular, this is my show, Catholic Citizen, we have a particular understanding of what is truth. And so we preach truth. And we don't believe that men can be women and women can be men. That is truth. And we don't think it's loving to necessarily go along with the narrative that says that you can, because I think there are studies that have already come out of Europe, and it's why a lot of European countries have banned some of this transgender care, because people are committing suicides, more likely to commit a suicide and have suicidal thoughts and ideation when they actually go through with the transition itself. But I want to go back to our original point. Harris, in 2019, an ACLU questionnaire, she was sent this when she was running for president. And it said, as president, will you use your executive authority to ensure that transgender and non-binary people who rely on the state for medical care, including those in prison and immigration to detention, will have access to comprehensive treatment associated with gender transition, including all necessary surgical care? If yes, how will you do so? Harris checked the box saying yes. And then she explained more in her interview as well. So it's important, she said, she elaborated, that transgender individuals who rely on the state for care receive the treatment they need, which includes access to treatment associated with gender transition. So it's there. She said it. It's in the ACLU questionnaire. And that type of kind of position is out of the mainstream. It's out of the step. And it's why a lot of suburban moms were like, whoa, wait a minute. Because more people are being impacted with this stuff through the education system, and they don't want their kids impacted by it. Because quite frankly, again, this is where, some of this gets personal, so it's hard to kind of share different things. But you could have a loved one who you care very deeply about, who's maybe struggling with a particular mental issue, but because this is such a social contagion and such a moneymaker, quite frankly, for a lot of these hospitals, that they might go see somebody in a hospital for something that they're struggling with mentally. And the person at the hospital places in their mind or their heart, maybe you're struggling with your gender. And so it starts them down this path where they could be thinking that they're struggling with their particular gender. Maybe they end up taking medicine or drugs, or maybe even getting surgeries, when all along they just needed help with something that was going on medically with them. And that's the danger with this stuff. It becomes related to finances and to money. And that's why Planned Parenthood has just jumped all in on this. They've become the second leading provider of, transgender care, if you will, in the country, because they can make money off of it. And we're making money off our kids, and it needs to stop. Let me just finish up with the show with two things here. And one is, I'm going to get you guys final thoughts on the election, any takeaways that you want.
Before you hit that, Pete, I just want to remind everyone, we've had some really cool interaction with this Kevin J on YouTube. I want to encourage you, both now and in future live streams, stay active in the chats, ask questions, but definitely press that like button, or in YouTube language, smack that like button, and hit the subscribe button. It really helps what we're trying to do to reach more people with the algorithms. And also, if you want to manually share it with people, that is really awesome as well. And then Peter, also, we produced here at Awaken Catholic for the Catholic Citizen this really great Catholic voting guide called The Catholic Vote. Even though the vote is over, it's still a really great way to learn about Catholic social teaching in different key areas that are relevant to these political discussions. And then Mike Tenney, on your show, you also published an episode where can you tell us just for 2 seconds about that interview?
Yeah, so my show is Pop Culture Catechism, and normally we talk about music or movies or a TV show, and recently for the election, we did one on infotainment, so like Jon Stewart, The Daily Wire, The Daily Show, Stephen Colbert, just Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro, these kind of talking heads who do kind of half entertainment, half politics, and so we talked about that, and from a Catholic perspective, it was with Patrick Nevy of the Crunchcast, who's a great Catholic podcaster. So yeah, if you, we don't always talk about politics on my show, but sometimes we do, but if you're into music and movies and that sort of thing, then check out Pop Culture Catechism.
All right, Peter.
All right, last three things as we end the show, and then Nick and Mike can kind of opine on anything that they want to as well. But first and foremost, let me just say, it's so important to have Mike on today's show. As you can tell by the way that, Mike and I talk about these things, we don't necessarily see eye to eye on everything. We don't articulate everything the same way. But look, Mike and I can still be friends. We can still get together and talk about these issues, have a good discussion. We could probably go for another 3 hours kind of digging into some of these things. But we're still going to like each other. We're still going to support each other. And we're still going to pray for each other. And I encourage you to do the same with your Democratic, your Republican, your progressive, your liberal friends. Whoever it is, just love them first and foremost. You can't kind of, forget that. next steps as well as we move forward as a nation. Give God thanks today, whether this is his direct will or permissive will. He has allowed it to happen, and it is what it is. And so we praise God for what he has given us, and we praise God that he's given us the great gift of life. Don't forget to love your neighbor, to pray, and to set about the work of changing culture to make the culture a culture of life. We still live in a culture of death, a culture which doesn't value life. And one of my fears with President Trump being elected, quite frankly, is the fact that because he made the pro-life platform less strong in the Republican Party, that Republicans moving forward will say, well, look, this is what we have to do to kind of be elected. We have to kind of moderate our positions on what is the foundational position of human rights, the right to life. If we can't fight for that right, we don't have any other rights. And so pray for him and for continued conversion, that it will be a pro-life administration moving forward for the next 4 years. But two more things here. We mentioned earlier maybe moments that changed the campaign. Kamala Harris's inability to be kind of quick on her feet, maybe in some interviews. The other was, you look back at the assassination attempt on President Trump's life and the movement, the small movement of his head in a split second, which literally saved his life. And when he gave his acceptance speech at 2:45 a.m. last night, he said, quote, "God spared my life for a reason." And I think he did. And so pray, though, that to truly make America great again, that we can be a country that isn't just governed by that phrase, "Make America Great Again," but it's governed by a motto that every life matters, every life beginning with the most vulnerable in the womb. Last thing I'll say then, when President Trump came up, and I think this is one of the things that made the difference in the election as well as President Trump's supporters, they didn't chant his name, Donald Trump or anything, but when he came up to speak or give his acceptance speech, which was a typical meandering, all over the place President Trump speech where he was inviting different people.
Excuse me, the term is weaving?
Weaving, yes, that's right. He's a weaver. When he came up, people were chanting USA. And I was quite touched by that we were just thinking about the country and that at least for me, that this was a country this was an election really about the future direction of the country in a really important area that maybe we didn't talk enough about, but that was the area of kind of religious liberty and free speech, two issues that I think are going to be continually important for the years to come. And I just think in one small way, even here in the state of Ohio, where you have like Columbus City Council who have set off to do investigations on local pregnancy centers and things of that nature, and claiming pregnancy centers are misinformation centers. So you have that thrown around a lot, as much as the left throws kind of the racism argument at whoever's might be Republican or conservative. You have also whoever says something that doesn't go along or fit the major narrative is just spreading misinformation. And so the dangers we have on that perspective for our country, they don't go away simply because Donald Trump was elected. I think some of the damage that could be done is stayed off for a little bit. But whatever we do, we have to fight for a country where people like Mike Tenney, myself, others who have differing, Joy Reid from MSNBC. I mean, some of the stuff she says, like, my goodness. But we have a right to say it because we have the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. That's foundational. And as long as we have the freedom to say things, we have the freedom to kind of get into the public square, fight about those good or bad ideas. And then you can come out and the good ideas, I think, at the end of the day, can win the day. But when you start censoring people, that's when things kind of get dangerous. So Mike and Nick, any final thoughts from your guys' end on this year's election?
If I could jump in first, just because it's connected to what you were saying, you mentioned this will always, you mentioned the chanting of the USA thing. And I was flooded with goosebumps the moment you said that, because that was a powerful and emotional moment, and exactly what you're saying. And connected to that, there were a few things that Trump said in his acceptance speech that were just absolutely amazing. But the thing that stood out the most to me from what he said, connected to everyone chanting USA, was he said, and this is a direct quote, "This will forever be remembered as the day the American people regained control of their country." And I think that that's so important, because I think more than this notion that half of the country hated Trump and half of the country loved him, or clearly more than half, it really, to me, is not an equivalent 50-50 or 51-49. There, like you were pointing out earlier in the show today, Peter, 75% of the population said that they are, what was the term, that they were unsatisfied with the direction that our country was headed or whatever. It really was our country that was unhappy with where things were going, and our country voted for Donald J. Trump. Now, that doesn't mean every person is doing backflips in excitement that he won, but as a country, that's what this vote represents, is that there is a majority here, and we were being spoon-fed this lie from the legacy media that the norm, the sane mentality, the sane viewpoint to hold is this woke one. And that if you don't hold this, you're falling behind and you are other. And it's just such a load of malarkey, to put it in as family friendly terms as I possibly can. It's such a crock of fecal matter. Like that notion that we were trying to be brainwashed and convinced to believe that we were the crazy ones. No, the reality is people that want to mutilate little children to put them in a position where they're manipulated into having these gender operations, they're the crazy ones. That is actually an evil thing. That's the kind of thing you would hear that Hitler and the Nazis were doing to people in the concentration camps, like these mutilating scientific experiments. You would literally hear those stories from that type of context, and today it's being tried. It has been getting force fed as you're supposed to accept this as the norm, and you're evil and pig-headed and bigoted if you don't agree with it. It's just utter nonsense. And so I feel such freedom that, as Trump said, this will forever be remembered as the day the American people regained control of their country. Mike Tenney, over to you.
Follow that one up, Mike.
Yeah, I think two thoughts. One is similar to what Peter was talking about, is, even if you've supported Donald Trump and JD Vance, I think we as pro-life people, we can't accept a compromised kind of half pro-choice, half pro-life, leave it to the states position. We can't leave that as the norm. And we really need, well, I think JD Vance and Donald Trump are right. And when they say, like, we need to show, when women don't trust us, we need to show women that we understand. We need to help women in other ways. 100%. I agree with all those things, but I think the onus is on us, those of us who are pro-life, and especially those of us who are speakers, to convincingly and winsomely make the pro-life argument again and again and again, that and it's not based just on our religion. It's, unless, do not kill. That's pretty widely shared. Don't kill innocent people. And a person is a person, no matter how small. Embryology and biology agree that, mammals begin their life cycle as an organism at conception. And so I think we need to again and again make those cases that it's not about controlling bodily autonomy. We need to know what a right is, know what the right to life is, and what's fundamental, and to be able to make that case over and over and over again, convincingly, while living with the love of Christ. The other thing that is my takeaway is I'm just always astonished by how people are just so in their echo chambers. And I don't think it's our fault. I think part of it is our psychology, is it's hard to listen to and see ideas that are different than what you think. I mean, that's hard. Our brains just don't like that. But the algorithms make it even harder, because the algorithms want to show you stuff that you like, and they want to show you your own opinions. So I think, as a faithful citizen, as a conscientious citizen, we have to intentionally try to listen to the other side and try to be open-minded and think, what is the good in what they're saying, even if it's covered in 90% bad. Where's the human person there? And there has to be something I can learn from them. They can't be totally evil. And so trying to have an open mind and hearing from the other side, and trying to really take their concerns at face value. And I think there's far too little of that. And if we can do that more, then we're going to have much better civil discourse. And those are my thoughts.
Beautiful. Thank you for that, Mike. And there's one thing I forgot to mention that I really want to kind of toss out there for a quick reaction before we end the show. Peter, you mentioned that you wish J.D. Vance, and Mike, you mentioned the same thing, that you wish J.D. Vance and Trump were more pro-life. I agree. I wish that they hadn't conceded so much ground on the Republican platform. But there is a part of me that is a little bit refreshed by it, because how many freaking decades have we had super pro-life Republican candidates and elected officials at multiple levels, including the presidency, that we were promised that they were super pro-life, they were going to save babies, and literally nothing changed. That is why the pro-life movement has, for decades, felt like we will never see the end of Roe versus Wade, because this is just the way it is. We're going to keep fighting, and we're going to hope that God does a miracle. And you know what? He did. He brought us this crazy rich guy from New York, and look at that. Roe versus Wade is gone, right? And Peter, your thing about substance over rhetoric, like Trump, from a pro-life, actual getting things done standpoint, has way more substance than the rhetoric of decades of Republican uber pro-life politicians. I just wanted to toss that out there because, again, substance over rhetoric, he actually did it, right? And now there's more to be done, no question. But I'm just saying, like, it's a little refreshing that he's honest about where he's at, and he's honest about what he will and won't do.
I find nothing refreshing about his particular stance right now, because I think the presidency has such a bully pulpit, and he has such a bully pulpit, even without the presidency, such a mouthpiece to move individuals across the country. I mean, like it or not, people do get connected and they follow their favorite political figures. Mike brought up Barack Obama earlier. A lot of people still obviously listen to his thoughts and his opinion. It's why they put him out in the campaign trail. Same thing with President Trump. And when you have rhetoric from him that says that this is a states' rights issue, a lot of people go along with that and they think, oh, that makes sense, right? And I think there's just a lot of danger in the rhetoric and language that he uses around it, because by saying that and then having policies now that kind of support that as well, you literally can set the movement back many, many years. Now, we could get into the different tactics as far as how you approach this issue and what's the best way to do it, whether or not he did this simply to take away an issue that could have been a vulnerability for him moving into this election. But look, President Trump, even back in 2016, during the campaign, praised Planned Parenthood. So he's never been like you said, Nick, he is a socialite, progressive from basically New York, who has some kind of populist policies, which have made him very popular. He loves the country. He is authentic. I mean, what you see is what you get. And I think people are kind of attracted to that. But at the end of the day, when it comes to kind of the pro-life cause, he didn't go out and select those three judges. Those three judges were brought to him by individuals who knew those judges, knew those backgrounds, and suggested that if you want to be elected, you better make a deal with conservatives and say that you're going to elect pro-life judges to the Supreme Court. And here's the thing about Trump. He keeps his promises. So he kept his promise a lot more than, like you mentioned, Nick, a lot of these former presidents have done. So
I think that's my point, though. Like, I agree with literally everything you just said, even in as much as it refutes what I said. But for me, when I say refreshing, what I think I mean is that we were made to feel helpless in this cause, in this endeavor for decades. We were made to feel like there's literally nothing that can be done except for keep voting for Republicans and keep waiting for this indefinite amount of time. And now there are paths. There's a clear path because it's at the state level, which I do wish federally it was acknowledged as the killing of another human being, which would make it illegal. I do wish that. But what I'm saying is now it feels like there is a visible path that can be followed, whether we will do so successfully or not. And it feels less helpless, less ominous, less ambiguous. And that only is a byproduct of what he did, even if it wasn't what he wanted or whatever, but like he did it and he kept his word. That's what I mean by refreshing, but I agree with everything you said.
Yeah. And I think, so ideally as Catholics, what we would want is someone of tremendous amazing character who has lived that his whole life, and then has policies which are emblematic of, or as close to the Catholic Church teaching as we can get. Like, that's the ideal. In this year's election, like most elections, you don't get the ideal. So you had two candidates, for example, who had both been involved in extramarital affairs, for example, in their personal life, right? So, and they both very flawed in their kind of political careers, in what they have done, what they haven't done, the positions that they've taken. So you're kind of left with, well, what policies are they going to impact, which either builds the kingdom of God or keeps the kingdom of darkness from advancing? And so you're kind of left with having to choose the lesser of two evils to a certain extent. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of felt in the country. But at the end of the day, look, I mean, this is the reality we now have. President Donald Trump is president-elect, and we have J.D. Vance, who, in all of my conversations with him prior to, being nominated, and they're not extensive conversations, but J.D. always struck me as a real genuine gentleman, a really someone who thinks very deeply about these issues, and someone who has a rare ability to articulate the issues in ways that people can, at least if they don't agree with them, at least respect them and understand them to a certain extent. So I think there is great hope in this next administration that we'll get other individuals who are appointed to the myriad of different governmental offices that can have a positive impact for life. But I remain nervous. I mean, you look at a lot of people talking about, they were excited about Robert Kennedy being, part of the Trump administration and things of that nature. I mean, Robert Kennedy has been pro-choice kind of his whole life. I mean, that's something that is, despite being Catholic, he's been really strong on and stuff. So, it's a trust and verify for me for this next Trump administration. But no matter what, let me just end with this. As Trump said after he was shot, we have to, as Catholics, continue every day to wake up and to fight for what is good, true, and beautiful, because there are powers and forces of darkness that don't want the light to shine. But it's up to you and I, to Mike, to everybody who's watching the show, to be people of love, of light, and truth to a culture that's in desperate need of it. So, Mike, thanks for joining us this week on The Catholic Citizen. Appreciate it. Nick,
Thanks
always
for having me
a pleasure. Absolutely. We'll talk to you guys next week as we continue this good fight on how we become the saints that we've been called to be. God bless.
Love you guys.